Boy, have you been to any playgrounds lately? They sure have changed from when I was a kid. Look at this place. It's huge. An imaginative array of things to climb on, walk on, hang from, swing from. You can do everything here. It's great. One thing hasn't changed, though. There's still plenty of sand around. And speaking of sand, boy, I can tell you a story about a sandbox I had. Now I'd like to take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the instructions that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. But remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. Now I'll show you how we built today's project. My father built us a sandbox. And there it is, in an ancient photograph that we dug up a few weeks ago. And can you believe it? That's me in that striped shirt, playing with my sister Carol. Well, anyway, I've been picking my father's brain the last couple weeks to find out the exact dimensions and some of the construction details that he used to build this sandbox. And I think I've come up with the 1990 version. Now, some of the materials have changed. The covering for the canopy is made from a new improved awning-type canvas, which is resistant to sunlight and rot, so it should last for a long time. Now, I know one thing for sure. My father wouldn't have bought cedar to make the sides or the seats, because it would have been too expensive. But today it's available at a reasonable cost, and the thing I like about it is you don't have to paint it. And one thing that they didn't have 38 years ago was pressure-treated lumber like this. What's nice about it is that it'll allow the damp sand to sit in it and it won't rot. And the construction detail is much like a good plant container. It'll hold the sand, but it'll allow it to drain through the cracks in the boards. Now, if we look underneath, we can see that that whole platform is supported by some cleats and a reinforcing strip down the middle, and that the legs that support the whole sandbox are also made out of pressure-treated material so they won't rot at the bottom. I'm going to get started cutting the pieces for the legs, which run from ground level right up to the bottom of the seat, and that's 13¼ inches. Now, the material that I'm using for the platform and the legs is known as 5/4 by 6 decking material. And I'm going to cut my legs using the radial arm saw, and I've set up a stop block so all 8 pieces will be exactly the same size. Now, my first cut is to square up the end. I'm going to join the legs together like this. And I suppose I could let it go at that, but if I want the inside and the outside dimensions to match, I have to remove the thickness of a board off of one of the side pieces. And I'll do that at the table saw. Now, to assemble the legs, I'm going to clamp the narrow piece in my bench vise and then take the other piece and line it up at the top edge. Now, to make sure the sides are flush, I'm going to use a square because the edges around it, it's kind of difficult to do it by eye. You just slide it until they're even, like that. And I'm going to pre-drill for the screws using a combination drill countersink. And the screw that I'm using is a 2-inch galvanized bugle head screw. And I'm going to put 3 of these in each pair of legs. Let's take another look at our prototype. And I'll show you how the cedar sides are joined together. Each joint is a 45-degree miter joint. And I did that mostly for looks, because a joint like this isn't very strong. The boards want to curl. It just doesn't hold together very well. But because I'm backing it with my legs and using some screws and construction adhesive, I think it'll be okay. Now, before I nail the joint together, I'm going to use something that I know my father didn't have, and that was construction adhesive. Squeeze the boards together. I'm just going to use some little 5-penny galvanized siding nails to hold it in place. Okay, now to hold the piece square while I continue working on it, I'm applying this temporary brace. And all I really do is take some diagonal measurements. And if they're equal, I know the piece is square. So we've got about 67 7/8. And we've got the same here, so I can fasten this end. Before I set the legs in place, I'm going to apply some more construction adhesive. Except this is a slightly different type. It's specially formulated to use with pressure-treated lumber. Now I'll just set the leg into the adhesive, flush with the top edge, and pre-drill some holes for the screws. Okay, now we'll just secure everything in place using some 1¼ inch galvanized screws. Well, now I'm ready to make the cleats that support the floor. And they're just some strips 1 5/8 inches wide cut out of a 2x4. Now with a piece of the support cleat cut to the proper length, I can just set it. Now I have to do one more thing, which is to make a notch around each leg. First, I'll just take my combination square and set it up against the side of the leg, making one pencil mark on each end. And now I'm going to turn it on its side, set my square to more than 1 inch, which is the thickness of the leg, and do that layout. Now my jigsaw, set up with a nice fresh blade, does a real good job cutting out that notch. Now the same methods are used to attach these cleats as I used for the legs. A little bit of construction adhesive, set them in place, and fasten it with some screws. I've just cut all the material that I need for the floor of the sandbox. Once again, it's the 5/4 by 6 decking. There are 6 pieces that fit between the cedar sides, and then there's a piece on each end that's a little bit shorter to fit between the legs. There's one more thing that I have to do, and that's lay out to notch around the side part of the leg, and I'll do that just like I did with the cleats using the jigsaw. I'll just take the piece out, and using my combination square, mark the thickness of the leg. Now the pressure-treated material that the floor is made out of is great for resisting insects and rot, but it does tend to shrink quite a bit, which is great for drainage, but terrible in terms of the sand because it'll all go through. So to help prevent that, I'm going to make some splines to go between the boards. And I'll rip those out of a piece of decking, 1 inch wide and 1/4 inch thick. Now to make the grooves in the edge of the boards for the splines, I'm going to use my dado head cutter. Okay, now some more construction adhesive to hold all the pieces of the floor down in place. And I'll just put the pieces back in, this time adding the splines. Now that the floor is secured, I don't need this temporary brace anymore. And the next thing to do is to add a little strength to the center of the floor. I'm going to put a cleat on the underside. What this cleat actually does is stiffens the whole floor, makes it act more like one piece of wood, therefore making it stronger. Now if I prop up the prototype with a sawhorse, I can give you a closer look at the roof framing system. It starts out with a couple gables, and they're connected with a little fascia piece right here. Up at the top there's a ridge, and there's some little rafters. I'm going to start by making the gable ends. I took a couple pieces of 1x10, and in the center I want to use the full height of the board. Down at the edge, I'm going to leave about 3.5 inches. Now, I've nailed two pieces together so I can cut both gables at the same time. And with them clamped in the bench vise, I'm ready to cut them with my circular saw, just leaving the line. Now the fascia board that joins both of the gable pieces should have its top edge beveled at the same pitch as the roof. And the ridge should be beveled on both sides to also follow the pitch of the roof. And what this does is allows a full width of the board for the canvas to be stretched over, so it makes a much tighter fitting top. Now to cut the bevel, I'm going to use my table saw. I've calculated it to be about 13 degrees. So the first thing to do is tilt the blade to 13 degrees, lock it in place. And then I can set the rip fence. Now the rip fence needs to be set 3.5 inches to the blade where it comes through the table, or actually the long point of the cut. Now I'm ready to run my two fascia pieces through. Now for the ridge, I don't have to make any adjustments. I just make two passes. I'm just going to use some 1 5/8" screws to hold the frame together, but I want to make sure I take the precaution of pre-drilling so I won't split this nice cedar. Okay, now the ridge is secured the same way with a few screws. Now we'll make 4 little rafters. Okay, now to get the length of the rafter, I'm going to mark it right here in place. A little mark up here for the ridge. And I'm going to exaggerate the angle that I want, make sure I get it right when I go over to the miter box. And another mark down here for the fascia. I'll go to the chop saw and cut them off. Now I'll just tilt my saw to 13 degrees, the same bevel that we used on the ridge and the fascia, and that'll be the right cut for the rafters. Just cut them to the mark. Well, once you've mastered this, you're now ready to frame that new roof on the room addition you're thinking about putting on. Okay, now that completes the cut at the top of the 2x4 standards, which will support the canopy. And I've actually made some angled cuts to conform to the gable, the same 13 degrees that I've used every place else. Now, there's one more thing I want to do to that piece, and that's to make a slot right up at the top edge to support the ridge. Okay, I'll check it for fit. That's good. Now I'm ready to attach it to the sides of the box. Okay, a little more adhesive. Now I'll just drill and countersink for the screws. Okay, well, 5 screws and the construction adhesive should be plenty to hold these standards in place. Now a little more construction adhesive for where the standards will meet the gable ends. And just take this whole assembly and slip it into the slots. Now the final woodworking aspect of the project is to make the seats. And they are just simple 45-degree angle cuts on a piece of 1x12. And now that I've cut one, I can use it as a pattern to cut the remaining 3. So that 1/4-inch rounding over bit does a nice job at easing all the edges on the seat. There won't be any splinters here. A little more construction adhesive to hold the seats down. And I suppose I could fasten these in place with some screws, but I'm a little bit afraid that if the head of the screw sticks up a little bit too high or close to the top of the surface, it might burn a small child. So I'm just going to set these in place with some 4-penny finish nails. You also note that I let it hang over the side about 3/4 of an inch. Now the first part of the canvas installation is to cover the gable ends. So I just leave myself a little extra below the side of the gable. I'm just going to staple it along the top. Okay, now I'm just going to take a razor blade and trim right along the back side of that gable. Just let the blade rest up against the wood and trim it off. On the bottom of the gable, I'm just pulling the canvas tight and fastening it with a couple staples. This is a great little tool, this tool right here, a hot melt glue gun. And they've only been around for a few years. You just put sticks of adhesive in it. It melts it as it goes through the gun. And I'm using it here to help secure the canvas to the frame. Now for the top, so that I don't end up with an edge that might fray, I'm simply tucking it under itself, about 3/4 of an inch. And what I'm going to do is just position it loosely and secure it at the corner temporarily with the staple that I'll remove later. I'll just position the whole piece. Now I'm going to put some glue right in that seam. Okay, if any little excess squeezes out like that, we'll let it harden and carefully trim it off later. Now with the staple removed, I can glue the end. Okay, now to secure the tuck that I made, that little fold, I'm just going to stick the glue gun in between it, run a bead of glue up, and just by reaching up to the outside, just squeeze it back down again. Well, now I can just stretch it over the fascia and attach it with a few staples. Now just trim off the excess on the bottom edge here. Okay, and a little more hot glue to secure it. Okay, I'd say that just about finishes it, except for a little bit of sand and some kids.